We are on Mercer Street at what is known as the Mercer Street Elementary School. Before I talk about this building itself, I want to talk about the site and the little bit of the history of the school that sat here before this edifice. About where the parking lot is right now was a frame building called the Academy. Anyone driving around town is familiar with Academy Street, North Academy, South Academy, and that's where that street got its name, was because of the schoolhouse that sat here and its playground. There were only two rooms, one room downstairs and one room upstairs, so it was very small. A number of years later, they added an addition of two rooms, but it was the first multi-room schoolhouse in the area. Prior to that, all the schools that were scattered around the township and in the borough were one-room schoolhouses. The Academy was the first public school, and there still existed at that time private institutions that were full pay. The Academy was partial pay. The two most familiar were Van Rensselaer Institute, which is on North Main Street, which was a Presbyterian school, and the Hightstown Classical and Scientific Institute, which is now known as Petty, but began in the Baptist church because it was a Baptist church school. In 1871, the state legislature passed a mandate that there be a free public school that was for 9 months of the year. Because of that, and also the increasing population of the town, which was due to the success of the Camden and Amboy Railroad and the UT Railroad, the additions I mentioned were put on the Academy, but the building became stressed for 1 through 8 school. So in 1894, the Board of Education approved building this brick building, which was quite a structure for its time. It had 8 classrooms, 4 on the first floor and 4 on the second floor. All 4 were of identical size. And then there was an addition, which was in the original plans, in the rear for laboratories and the library. And it was a laboratory, not a lavatory, because the lavatories were privies outside. There were no bathrooms either in the Academy or in this building when it was built. In the top of the Academy was a belfry, and in it was a bell that was donated by a Peter Bouillet. He always thought that the school should have a bell, so he did that in 1852. Unfortunately, he died less than 12 months later in 1853, but the town was so proud of his donation and such, they rang the bell on the day that he was buried for many hours. That bell ended up being removed from the Academy and placed on this building in a belfry when this was completed in 1894. From the time the Board of Education approved it to the time that they got a contractor and the completion of the building was pretty much all in 1 year, including finding the architect and coming up with the design. But it was a quite handsome building for its time, particularly with the towers in the front. The towers in the front also had small offices in it for the principal and for the nurse. Each of the 8 classrooms, and 1 classroom for each class 1 through 8, were 27 by 23, quite good size. And on 2 walls were the very large blackboards that were truly blackboards, not green boards. And on the other 2 walls and beneath the blackboards, there was light-colored wainscoting. The building was quite modern in that it was heated by steam heat, which was unusual, for the time. But it was central heat. All the masonry work was done by a mason called William Dillon. And William Dillon also did the tower out in the East Windsor Cemetery, the Norton Tower, and which is another way to see the value of his and the quality of his stonework. We happen to be standing right now in the rear of the Mercer Street School building, and there's a entrance just to my right, and then about 30 feet over is another entrance. Back in those days, there were separate entrances for the girls and boys. and they couldn't congregate together before the school bell rang and the doors were unlocked. So the boys would end up standing here, and the girls would end up standing at the other door, so that they didn't have too much time to socialize. As I mentioned, this is a 1 through 8, so there was no high school in Hightstown at that time. Anybody who wanted to go to high school that didn't go to Hightstown Classical and Scientific or Van Rensselaer actually got on the train right behind here and went by train down to around the Bordentown area and changed train to go to Trenton. So they all graduated from Trenton High School, even though they were Hightstown residents. My grandfather, as a matter of fact, was one of those, and I have his Trenton High School certificate, graduation certificate, which may make people think that he lived there. He did not. He went by train every day from Hightstown. Of course, not everybody went to school past 8th grade. You know, it was an agricultural community and some industry in town, etc. So most that wanted to went to the other private institutions. The public, there was only a handful that actually made that trip every day. So this was completed in 1894. Very, very useful building, low maintenance since it was brick. A few years later, there was more land donated behind here for the playground, which goes up to what we know now as the Greenway, which is on the same right-of-way where the Camden and Amboy Railroad once stood. The building, even though it was substantially well-built and modern for its time, obviously by the mid 20th century became dated as regards to safety features and conveniences and such. So it was condemned for a use as a school building. So the last classes that were held here for 1st to 8th grade was in 1939. Soon thereafter, or actually before that, there was a high school that was built on Stockton Street. Doesn't exist anymore, but was called the Stockton Street School, and that was before what is now the Grace Rogers School across the street was built as a high school later, and the original high school was raised. So since it was a public building, it had to be put out to public bid, and this is after it was condemned. So in 1941, September, 2 p.m., there was a public auction, and there were only 2 bidders that showed up for the auction. So at the public auction, there was just 2 bidders. That one was the Masons, and they had been in the town for probably a little shy of 100 years, and they always met in the upstairs of commercial buildings downtown. Their last location was on the 3rd floor, which was sort of a dangerous location, narrow stairway, at 100 North Main Street, which is above what's now known as the Allen and Stoltz building. So the Masons were very, very interested in buying this property because they rented there, they did not own it. But the other builder was a company called Hightstown Wrecking Company, and they wanted it because the brick could be salvaged. So they were going to rip down the building and salvage the brick and sell the brick to build other buildings. Well, as the story goes, the owner of the Hightstown Wrecking, the other bidder, was a Mason from another town. So when he determined that the other bidder was the Masons, he decided to stop bidding. So the Masons were successful in the bid, and for the amount of $2,265 for the building and all the property that's behind here. The Masons occupied this building from 1941 to 1979. 1970s was a bad time for fuel prices. You know, gasoline went from 17 cents to 29 cents. Horror, right? But so did fuel oil, and this building was very expensive to heat when the fuel oil prices started to creep up into $50 and even higher. The Masons only used about 20% of this building, a meeting room on the 2nd floor and a refreshment room on the first floor. So the other rooms were vacant, but obviously had to be heated whether they were used or not. The YMCA had been in town for over 100 years, and the YMCA didn't have a home. They always rented offices, and their indoor activities were at the schools, the gymnasiums in the schools, and actually in some of the churches. There was a three-way deal that was worked out between the Masons and the YMCA, and I happened to know at the time, since I was involved with both the YMCA and the Masons, that the Grange on North Main Street was struggling. Agriculture was dying. The members of the Grange had gotten old, moved away, passed away. So they had trouble maintaining their building, which is a one-story with a basement building and much more efficient than this building. So the three-way deal was between the Masons and the Grange and the YMCA. Everybody ended up being happy. And that happened in 1979. The YMCA finally had a home. It was used almost principally as a daycare center, other than there was a fitness center on the second floor and a play area in the rear. Later, the local Y was having trouble maintaining the daycare center because so many newer families in the area didn't like to bring their child into an old building. You know, they like the new daycare centers, the new in strip malls, etc. So this Y struggled and merged with the Western Monmouth YMCA, which did keep it going for a number of years until they found that the market had changed as well. They sold this building, the YMCA, to the borough of Hightstown in 2019 because the borough had not had a home since the Irene, the flood of 2011, which destroyed the borough hall. The plans are almost completed and approved for this being converted from a schoolhouse that became a Masonic lodge, that became a YMCA, that will end up being the Borough Hall, which we are very happy about because it's a historic building in town and certainly unique.